welcome to Capitol Hill. Well, one day after the High Court struck down the government's Malaysian solution for asylum seekers, the way forward is far from clear. The Prime Minister's leaving open the option of returning to the Howard government's processing centre on Nauru and the reintroduction of temporary protection visas. But some in the Labor Party would find that solution unpalatable. Julia Gillard may face a push from caucus for an end to any offshore processing. To discuss the day's events, I've been joined by Labor MP Kelvin Thompson and Liberal MP Andrew Laming. Welcome to you both.
Good afternoon, Lyndall and Andrew.
Kelvin, if I could start with you, what do you think the way forward should be? Should it be onshore processing only or a return to the Howard government's solution?
Well, in terms of those alternatives, Lyndall, the government's clearly taking legal advice and needs to in the wake of the High Court decision. My own view about the way forward is that we should be lifting our refugee intake to 20,000 per year. It's presently 13,750 or 14,750, depending on whether you count the Malaysian solution in or out. But I feel that if we were to increase our refugee intake, that would enable Australia to be good, decent, compassionate international citizens, and it would assist us to deal with these issues.
Then what do you, how do you tackle the issue of asylum seekers arriving in Australia? Should they be processed here? Should the government look at an alternative offshore solution?
Well, the government is looking at these solutions. Clearly it needs to in the wake of the High Court decision. The High Court decision leaves unclear the question of whether offshore processing is legal at all. You've had Professor Don Rothwell from the ANU suggesting that the High Court would not now accept the idea of Nauru or Manus Island. So given that sort of advice, the government needs to examine the legal issues involved and of course the political ones as to whether it's better to move away from mandatory detention towards community detention based approaches. So those things no doubt will be the subject of consideration over the next little while. I for my part don't think the government should be rushed or panicked into action. This is an issue which has been around for a long time and it needs to be considered carefully.
Andrew, your immigration spokesperson Scott Morrison says he sees no impact from the High Court decision for processing on Nauru, but as Kelvin pointed out, other people do think there may be an impact. Julia Gillard says the initial oral advice, legal advice the Cabinet has is that it may throw processing offshore into doubt. Why is the Coalition so confident that the Nauru option hasn't been affected by the High Court's decision?
Or by reading the decision itself in paragraph 128, it's certainly not clear, and so we'd like further analysis of that decision yesterday. But importantly, Lyndall, you can't keep increasing the humanitarian intake for Australia simply because you're losing control of your borders. Our refugee intake are firewalled places with the UNHCR. Australia is number 1 or 2 in the world for that. The arrivals by sea, we call them irregular arrivals, they come out of our special humanitarian intake and they displace other forms of arrivals. So it's important to remember that just because we're losing control of our borders doesn't mean we're actually going to be necessarily taking more refugees from the hotspots around the world where we should be supporting UNHCR, because that actually stops people jumping in leaky boats in the first place.
But wouldn't increasing the humanitarian intake give some sense to the notion of the orderly queue, which many dispute, but that the Coalition has often talked about? Taking many formally as part of a refugee intake might actually mean people don't have to jump in the leaky boats.
Well, no, because the disorderly queue, which is pushing people through people smugglers, leads to these irregular maritime arrivals. And what Australia really should be doing is emphasising the care of refugees through UNHCR. Australia has a fantastic record of firewalled places, second only to the US, and that needs to continue. But just because you're losing control of your borders, spending $1 billion a year, having 4 incidents every day, fires in detention centres, you can't simply say we're going to gracefully increase the numbers, the problem goes away. It simply doesn't.
Kelvin, the opinion in the caucus seems to differ between what the solution should be for dealing with asylum seekers. Is that merely reflective of the opinion in the community, that some think that a return to the Howard solution is the best option, others think that processing onshore should be the best option?
No doubt there is different thinking about these issues, both within the community and within the Parliamentary Labor Party. Can I respond to Andrew's observation about increasing the humanitarian intake by saying it's not my view that we should increase the refugee intake in isolation. It's my view that we should cut the skilled migration intake, which has skyrocketed in recent years. It's now up towards 125,000. I think it should be pared back to 25,000. I think it is possible for us to walk and chew gum at the same time on migration issues. That is to say, to have a decent, compassionate, humanitarian response, as well as meet the concerns of the Australian community about rapid population growth and its impacts in terms of housing affordability, cost of living pressures, traffic congestion, declining birds, animals, plants and the like.
If we could go to the politics of the situation, Kelvin, do you accept that if the government did move to reopen the processing centre on Nauru and possibly also reintroduce temporary protection visas, that will be a huge back down from what it said publicly before?
Well, the government hasn't moved to do those things, Lyndall, so I think it's rather hypothetical. The government's indicated that it will be studying the High Court decision. I think everyone will be looking closely at the High Court decision to see what options are available and not available from a legal point of view. It's worth observing that Nauru has taken steps to ratify the United Nations Convention on Refugees, and that it is taking steps forward from the days when the Howard government made use of it. But I think it's premature to be speculating about how people might respond to particular approaches.
What do you think, though, the decision by the High Court to strike down the Malaysian solution does to the government's credibility and Julia Gillard's credibility in particular?
Well, I think it's been a tough year, a character-building year for all of us, but we weren't elected to sit around feeling sorry for ourselves. I think our task is to manage the economy well, and we've been doing a good job in that regard. Australia is in a much better place than the United States, the United Kingdom and Europe. All the indicators like inflation, interest rates, unemployment, our budgetary position, we're in much better shape than other countries and in much better shape than we were left by the Howard government. So the fundamentals of managing the economy well, we've been doing those, and our task is to continue doing those.
Andrew, do you think if the government did end up at least looking at the option of pursuing Nauru as an offshore processing centre, that the coalition should facilitate any legislative change that would require to make it consistent with the High Court decision?
Well, obviously we'll look at the legislation when it comes along, Lyndall, but we've been saying it for a long time. Pick up the phone to the President of Nauru, and Labor really hasn't been listening. Today's not a day for cheap shots at the Prime Minister, but it's a day for remembering that we are left with $1 billion bill every year because of this disastrous outcome that began with Prime Minister Kevin Rudd unpicking all of the coalition's laws that actually stopped the boats. And of course this was an era in 2008 of no consequences, Lyndall, where you could do anything legislatively and there was no problem. But now we're wearing these challenges, and I know for Kelvin it's been a very tough year, but it's actually been a very, very tough administration. I think Julia Gillard will be consigned as a political footnote of rank incompetence in Australia's political history. She's the LBJ of Australian politics, who thought it looked so easy looking over the former Prime Minister's shoulder, but in reality I can't see a single thing that she has touched that's worked. And this has got to be a great concern, both for her own caucus, but also the independents. I mean, initially we felt sorry for Labor for having to live with the weird requests of the independents and having agreed with them and consorted with them, but now we feel genuinely sorry for the independents having to deal with Julia Gillard and the Labor Party in their current state.
Andrew, this may just be a touch of a cynical question, but if the government did opt for Nauru and temporary protection visas, that would remove what has been a potent political weapon for you, wouldn't it? It was a central part of Tony Abbott's last campaign to stop the boats, to pick up the phone to Nauru.
Well, the job in politics is to make Australia a better place, and if Labor picks up coalition policy and we look at the detail, I think that will be a good thing for Australia. In the end, it's not about Labor versus Liberal, it's about fixing the borders, and if they pick up policies that do that, then of course we'd like to look at the detail and support it if appropriate.
Calvin, what do you say to those people who say the issue of asylum seekers has really been overhyped by the politicians, that it's actually not that much of a problem, and why is so much time being spent on it?
I agree with them 100%, Lyndall. The truth is that this year there have been, up till the 30th of June, there were 1,675 people arrived by boat in Australia. Now, at that rate of boat arrivals, it would take 30 years for boat people to fill the MCG, which for non-Melburnians has a capacity of 100,000. You compare that with the skilled migration program, which is over 100,000, that is to say filling the MCG every year. So it has certainly intrigued me that we spend thousands of public policy hours debating the question of refugees and asylum seekers when its practical impact in Australia is minimal, and it is a tiny subset of the much larger question of our population growth, which is 1 million every 3 years, and our net overseas migration, which is over 200,000 per year.
Andrew, how do you answer that question? If the boat arrivals aren't actually that many in number, why spend so much political time and money on it?
Well, we think it's simply immoral to develop domestic policies that encourage this illegal trade of people smuggling. We think that refugees need to be assessed at the most appropriate location, as close as possible to these areas, and that's where UNHCR is working. And to turn a blind eye, to give up, to say it's all too hard, to forget your border control, is to basically invite more people smuggling. And it's okay to say it's only been, 12,400 people on 240 boats or whatever, but once you stop patrolling your borders, then there's all sorts of problems. There's flow-on effects, there's people stuck in transiting countries. It's something we don't want to support, and we want to see UNHCR doing their good work and assessing refugees where they are already doing it. And the last thing we expect people who are vulnerable to do is to have to travel halfway around the world to lodge an application claim. We know there's many who are subject to awful political treatment, and they haven't got a chance of getting on a boat. They don't have the money to do it, and it's ridiculous to turn a blind eye to that and simply say if you can cobble together the money, give a boat a crack. We need to be focusing on helping people who need help most, and doing it right at the location where it's occurring where possible. That's the objective.
If I could finish with a quick question to both of you on the issue of poker machine reform. Andrew Wilkie has set this up as a key issue for him. He says he thinks he'll get enough support in the Parliament to pass through the poker machine reforms that the government is going to put up. Kelvin, do you think he will get the support he needs in Parliament?
Yes, I don't see any reason why not, Lyndall. The indications from the MPs who we need in order to pass legislation of that character are that we will get the support we need to get that legislation through the Parliament. I noticed there was some discussion today about the position of the Salvation Army. The Salvation Army in my state of Victoria has indicated that they support the pre-commitment approach, the mandatory pre-commitment approach, and I hope that there's not undue pressure being brought to bear on them elsewhere.
And Andrew, just very quickly, do you think they'll pass?
Well, coalition supporting voluntary pre-commitment. We're asking the big questions. Does Wilkie's legislation actually work? Does it have unforeseen consequences? This public debate about the impact it will have on particularly the major clubs in my community is still one that we're having. We're also seeing it in New South Wales. And I'd be very, very concerned if I was Andrew Wilkie, thinking that this will get through by Christmas. The battle, I think, Kelvin's a lot larger than we realise yet.
And that's where we'll have to leave it, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time.
Good to talk with you both.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Join us again tomorrow.